Hey folks, today we are going to make a somewhat traditional beef stew. I call this Grandma's beef stew. We got some beef, just a chuck roast. We got some onions, potatoes, carrots, some beef stock, Worcestershire, salt, pepper, oregano, paprika if you like, and of course some potatoes just for good measure. First, we're going to start by dissecting up our veggies. I am using red potatoes here because I like red potatoes. They seem to keep a lot longer, and after they are cooked, they hold their shape, unlike, say, a russet or a white potato that just turns to mush. So, personal preference here, I just prefer the reds. Use what you like. I think of beef stew as like a southern comfort food, but the reality is beef stew's been around a very, very, very long time. The world's oldest known evidence of a stew is found in Japan, dating back to, I'm probably going to mispronounce this, the Jomon period. That's about the 8th to the 4th century BC. That is a very long time, certainly a lot longer than the southern United States has been around. I just chalk it up to it's just good food. In the U.S., we kind of think of beef stew. A lot of times they say that chuck wagon beef stew, cowboys and cattle drives, and chuck wagons feeding the hungry cowboys at the end of the day. That kind of conjures up an image of at least what I think of beef stew. And I think that just comes out of practicality that during the days of the cattle drives, around 1870, 1890-ish, cattle was in a plentiful supply. You're herding cattle, so you've got plenty of beef. And it's just a good hearty meal. Root vegetables could be transported, and they keep for a very long time. So it's just, kind of like a hearty meal. So I think that just goes hand in hand, and maybe by accident, but anyway, it works, and that's at least what I think about. So here we're taking just a piece of chuck roast. This is it's literally just a slice of the cow's shoulder. I mean, that's bluntly the way to put it. Typically they're around 3 pounds or so at the grocery store. I'm sure you can get them bigger, smaller, but 3 pounds seems to be about the average size. Just cutting these into about 1-inch chunks, nothing real complicated here. So we just want to get them down into manageable pieces. Now we've got this into manageable pieces. Isn't that pretty, folks? On a side note, I try my best not to let raw meat touch my cutting board because it's a little hard to sanitize. Next, we're going to put a pan over medium-high heat, throw in some olive oil, get a couple of cups of flour to coat the meat as a breading. 1 cup is probably more than enough here, and then we want a couple of heavy pinches of kosher salt. You can certainly use table salt, but I prefer kosher. That's for a different video. And throw in some oregano. If you don't like oregano, don't use oregano. So, but it's pretty typical, pretty classic there to use salt and oregano. A lot of times when we're going to saute beef, I like to put the salt directly on the meat and then coat it, but we're trying to be a little traditional here. So don't skip this part. It's going to take some time, but we want to saute each piece of beef just to build up a brown coating, a brown layer. This is going to take some time to do it because we need to cook it on all sides a little bit to get that nice, it's not exactly a sear, but we'll call it a sear. Why not? Well, a sear's done at much higher heat, but what we're doing is building up layers of flavor here. So that looks awesome. Again, don't skip this step. It is going to take some time. After 4 or 5 minutes, 3 or 4 minutes on each side, depending on how hot you have your stove, you want to flip these over. We're just building layers of flavor here, folks. You can certainly do this in your pan and just saute them and stir them till on a saute mode if you're using an electric pressure cooker. But this is traditional. A little flour in here. It's going to just add that extra layer that we're looking for, and that looks fantastic, folks. As with all sorts of frying, you do not want to crowd your pan, so it's going to take a couple of different turns. But notice how we're searing, cooking the ends of it. Take your time with this. We want as much of that browning on the edges as possible. It adds flavor. It is definitely worth the time to do this, so don't skip it. This is probably the most complicated part of this whole dish. Now, here I'm just deglazing our pan. If nothing else, I just want all those little yummy bits that have cooked down into the pan, all that flavor that's still stuck in the pan. Not a necessary step, but I think it's worth it, and we're just going to dump that directly over the meat. I'm using an Instapot. This is where we're doing something different than a traditional beef stew. So we're going to throw in 3 cups of beef broth here. Traditionally, we would use a stew pot or even a crock pot and cook it for 8 or 10 hours. Go ahead and throw in some paprika if you like. Don't like paprika? Don't use it. Always need some pepper. We already have salt built in, remember, in the coating, but a little bit of Worcestershire sauce, and then next we're going to throw in our veggies, our onions and potatoes. Using a pressure cooker, either a manual or there goes our carrots. Using the pressure cooker is going to greatly speed up the cooking process. There goes our can of diced tomatoes, fire roasted. There goes our onions. Potatoes are next. I use the baby carrots because that's what I had on hand. So if you got a crock pot, cool. Just you're gonna have to cook it for about 8 hours or so, maybe even 10 hours on low, and that is delicious. But I'm gonna cook this for about 90 minutes in a pressure cooker. The Instapot is awesome. Look at all that goodness that we're about to cook. Now the great thing about Instapot is you set it for whatever time and then just walk away. 90 minutes later, let the steam out. If you do this with your fingertip, I promise you're only going to do that once. So use something to release the steam valve, and look at that goodness. Carrots rose to the top. There's the beef. It's looking good. The camera lens is fogged up. And now we get to eat this, folks. Super simple. It just takes a little time to cook. Nothing complicated about it. I hope y'all try this recipe. It is traditional. It's classic. And it is absolutely delicious.